just internal.
It's not leaving the building.
It's
not leaving the room.
Yeah, it's not on channel 13.
That's right. Not leaving the room.
I'm not going to introduce him. He's just going to go up there.
Okay.
We know who he is.
That it?
Yeah, that's all I have. And then, so I think that's pretty much good to go, except for if you want to let.
When it drops down, it automatically goes right up.
That's fine.
Okay, yeah, it's up to him. You want me to put on standby? Yeah, you can just
Good.
put on standby. When you're ready, just go ahead and put on standby.
Before we get started, let me just point out how we'll do this today. Dr. Hamre is going to be doing a briefing similar to the one that he'll do today on Monday when he joins the Vice President, the Secretary, the Chairman, and the Director of the Joint Staff, Admiral Blair, for the real rollout of this. Our thought was to do this with you today would give you an opportunity to focus some of the questions that will concern military personnel, their dependents, in a way that we won't be able to do on Monday. So during the course of the presentation, we actually bring down the lights so you can see the presentation on the screen. And Dr. Hamre will go through the presentation. Then at the conclusion of that, we'll bring the lights back up and you can ask questions on whatever materials he's covered. But the point I think is worth making is that if there is an area that he has talked about during the course of the presentation that you kind of want him to repeat for the purposes of your television camera, just ask a question that stimulates that, and Dr. Hamre is very accommodating, and I'm sure he'll go along with that. So with that, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, Dr. John Hamre.
I should probably, off the record, apologize to all of you that you had to come in on a Saturday here. I'm sorry for that. I would like to give you in advance, let me say the only other people that have seen this, frankly, of course, the Secretary has seen this and will be, of course, part of the rollout on Monday. And then a small group of people here in the department have been working on it, but no one else has yet seen this picture. And so I know that you have to be prepared, and we especially need your help in communicating to the department because there are going to be some jarring things, at least at first blush, and we need your help in communicating that. What I am going to do is to go through a series of charts that explains this new business strategy for the Department of Defense. And first of all, let me say this is a subset, or I should say this is the second half of the Secretary's Quadrennial Defense Review. This spring, when he undertook the Quadrennial Defense Review, and it had to deal with all of the major issues, how large a military are we going to have? How many of them will be stationed overseas? How many carriers should we have? Where should they be stationed routinely? How large should our nuclear forces be? These large questions obviously had to be the first priority questions. At the time, he said he wanted to tackle the business side of DoD, but there wasn't time. And so to deal with that, he asked that I head up a task force, and we had some outsiders come in to help us with this. And we were looking at trying to bring in these modern business practices that frankly industry has pioneered, this exploding economy in the United States. So let's harness what we can that's relevant in that experience and bring it into the Department of Defense. This effort really is consistent with and really related to the Vice President's National Performance Review. The Vice President has been the leader of trying to find a way to make the government more efficient. Americans still want to have effective government services, but they don't want to pay exorbitantly for them. And so finding a way to get government that costs less, and this is very much a part of that. From our perspective, of course, it's not so that we save money, it's so that we can save the muscle. And because dollars are tight and we need to maintain our modernization program, this is more than anything a warfighting initiative so that we can preserve our warfighting capability. we have had a series of principles to guide us, and we call it a return to new basics. Some of this is old ideas, but a lot of it is frankly the new basics that's emerged working that industry has pioneered over the last 4 to 5 years. We are adopting those best business practices from industry, and you're going to see that shortly. We're going to return to our core functions, and in some cases that means rethinking the way we process our plans for missions and the way the missions are evolving. As you can see in the 4th bullet, we're tailoring the organization now in a very important way to reflect some of these new missions. In the old days, it used to be that big were better than smaller, but now it's fast are better than slow. And so the goal here is not to be big, the goal is to be fast. And that's been our organizing concept. There are 4 elements to this reform package. And I will deal with each of these separately. Business practices, organizational changes, streamlining through competition, which is a major source of our saving money, and then finally eliminating infrastructure. Let me first talk about new business, about the business practices. Industry has shown the way. Frankly, we've done a lot of this ourselves, but we are making a major commitment here to electronic operations, and I'm going to talk about each of these in subsequent charts. Let me first talk about contracting. We process about 11 million contracts a year. Right now, it's largely a paper-based system. If I were to take you out to Columbus, Ohio, where we have our large contract payment office, and it's a large operation. We disperse about $43 million an hour at this operation. It's huge. It is still largely a paper-based operation. There are 15 linear miles of shelf space for the contracts. We administer 370,000 contracts at any one time out in Columbus. When we print a contract, we actually print 16 or 17 copies of the contract, and only one of them goes to Columbus. So someplace else, we've got all these other contracts. We probably have 200 to 300 miles of shelf space dedicated to contracts. We want to get to a paper-free operation, and it is astounding how much you can save by deciding, my goal is to get out of the paper business. Now, in some cases that means automating what you're doing. In some cases it means finding a different way to do business. For example, 75% of all of these contracts are for less than $2,500. Well, for $2,500 you can use a commercial credit card and go down and buy it directly rather than going and writing a contract. And it may cost us between $100 and $150 to process a contract, when if you were to use a credit card it costs you 25 cents to 50 cents. So obviously we're going to save a lot of money through this process. We think we could save up to $200 million a year when this is finally implemented. That's just a picture of the shelf space. And as I said, we have 15 linear miles of shelf space out at Columbus, Ohio for this operation. Everybody's talking about doing business over the internet, and we are making a major commitment to do that. Right now, if you were to go out to the average motor pool and say they are in the process of requisitioning batteries for Humvees, they will go through an elaborate process, first finding out what the stock numbers are, then going over and requisitioning that from a supply center. The supply center will then get that. They will then see if they have it on a shelf. They'll place an order for them, probably modifying a contract. We will then get that order. We'll get a receipt from the company that they have shipped it. We'll try to match that up with a delivery report. We'll then try to match it up with an invoice. It's a huge paper-based system. Our goal in the future is to put a laptop computer or a computer at that first sergeant's desk, and when he needs new batteries, he scrolls up an electronic catalog, orders the batteries, quantity, and he pays for it with a credit card right on the computer screen, and that's it. This is the ultimate democratization of the acquisition process, and it's putting the tool in the hand of the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines that are having to live with this system. We believe this, frankly, is not only going to save money for the government, but frankly, it's going to make life a lot easier for our average troopers out there. They're not living with this cumbersome, paper-bound business process that we've developed over the years. We're going to give them user-friendly techniques. internet-based publishing. Let me explain. First of all, this is an entirely different way of thinking about the printing business. I used to be the comptroller, and when I was the comptroller, I was responsible for the financial management regulations of the Department of Defense. And here is a complete set of financial management. There's 46,000 pages. 15 volumes. There's a limited collector's edition that's available for anybody that would like to get their own. About a year ago, we decided we were going to get out of that business, and we did. And we stopped printing them, and they're now available in a CD-ROM form. This is now the way you get the financial management regulations. But in one sense, this is obsolete technology as well, because these documents, if you think you are still bound to a document, if it's in this form, or even if it's in this form, you're still in the mindset that I need to take a document, print it up, and distribute it all over the place. When in fact, let's take volume 3, we have in this case, it's regulations that covers compensation. If Congress, for example, changes the rules on compensation, say for retiree benefits, maybe only 2 or 3 paragraphs would change inside the entire document, but then you've got to print the entire document. So the mindset in the past was print and distribute. Print 10,000 copies and mail them all over the place. The new philosophy that we're embracing is print on demand. If you put it on the internet and you say these documents are now available on the internet, we're no longer going to be printing them. You will only need to pull up that page when you need it. Okay? We will electronically notify people of a change in the regulation, and then they pull it up if they have an application where they need the new guidelines. So your rules and your regulations are instantly available now, as opposed to having, shelf space dedicated to dusty old. Now, for those of you that need to fall asleep at night reading financial management regulations, you'll have to print up your own. The Secretary has directed we are going to discontinue publishing instructions and directives as of July 1st of next year, and we will go to an internet-based system for publications next year. Let me talk about some of the other business practice changes, because I think these are things most of the average soldier, sailor, airman, and Marine are going to be most interested in, frankly. Let's first of all talk about travel. I don't think I've gone to an installation where at some point I haven't confronted someone complaining about our travel system. There are countless steps. It takes hours to go through it. Nobody trusts you, so you have to produce all this paper. Huh? Last year, we processed 370 million pieces of paper that were backup documentation for travel. When you all those little receipts, staple them together, photocopy it, submit it in quintuplicate. Is that what the right word is? 5 copies. It's tedious. For the average travel reimbursement was only $250. So we were spending, for every dollar we spent on travel, we were actually spending an extra 30 cents on a system to manage travel, which is really crazy. So we're going to a new system. We prototyped this in 25 locations around the country, and we found that on the average, customer satisfaction and performance improved by about 100%, between 75 and 150%. We measured everybody before we started the test, and then we measured everybody 6 months into the test. Customer satisfaction was up between 75 and 150%, depending on the category, and costs were down 65%. So we're going to save about $200 million a year off of this, and from the average soldier's perspective, frankly, they're going to get improved service, dramatically improved service. Prime vendor contracting. If we were to go up right now to Walter Reed Hospital, if we were to go up there 3 years ago, we would go into a room this size that was where they were storing all the bandages and cotton swabs and Alka-Seltzer and whatever else that they keep in the hospital. And they had a little warehouse. And of course, when you have a warehouse, you have all the costs of maintaining a warehouse. You have the loss of the goods that are broken. You pull it off the shelf, you break a bottle. Some things got hidden behind a stack of other things, and the expiration date, we went past the expiration date and can't use it. All kinds of problems that come when you have a big warehouse like that. We've gone now to a philosophy, just like industry has, of just in time. So that when you need things the next day for various types of surgeries, you're notified the day before. We tell them what's coming up, and the next morning things are delivered at the freight dock. So we're no longer storing it. We obviously save money, and we frankly get better service because you're getting the most current technology and medicines available through this process. 90% now of all of our goods in our hospitals, peacetime. This is not wartime applications. Obviously, wartime we still need to stock things that are unique for battlefield applications. But for peacetime, 90% now is available directly from vendors on a direct vendor basis. We will be extending this now for all food products. So, for example, mess halls. Instead of having a warehouse storing all those dried potato flakes, we'll be getting it directly from vendors, on an as-needed basis. We'll be doing it for office supplies and maintenance supplies. So broom handles, dustpans, toilet paper, everything is now going to be available through these direct vendor contracts, and we'll be doing that over the next 2-year period. Let me jump down to transportation of household goods. I don't think I have been to a military base where at some point somebody hasn't complained to me about our transportation system for household goods. And there probably isn't a soldier, if he or she haven't had their furniture broken, they know somebody who has. And that's because we've had a system that only looked at one small part of the household goods process. And that was just the cost for a carrier to move it from point A to point B. But we've ignored the cost of the transaction costs associated with managing that move, taking care of the claims and the damages, etc. And because we've gone to a lowest cost supplier, we've frankly tended to get lower quality. And that's why it turns up that 25% of all of our moves end up with damage claims, compared to the industry average of only 10%. So we have a poor system that needs to change. We need to change it by adopting kind of the modern procedures that, frankly, business has developed. Relocation services, member-arranged moves. Let the member decide what they want by way of services and buy it themselves. We'll give them the money, and they can go out and manage it if they want. It's an option. It isn't mandatory. Do-it-yourself moves. I don't know if any of you have ever done do-it-yourself moves, but we make it painful to try to move yourself rather than easy. If you want to do a do-it-yourself move now, you have to go through this humiliating process of renting a truck, going down to a public weighing station, weigh it empty, go load your stuff up, then take it back to the weighing station, weigh it full, as though we don't trust anybody. Then you take those documents over to one place, certify them, you move, then you go to your new location, you take them and get them recertified, you take them to a finance office, and then they only reimburse you 80 cents on the dollar. Now, what's the incentive for somebody that wants to move themselves with that kind of a system? We've got to clean that up. And that's one of the things we'll be doing in this change of business practices. Okay, let me move now to some organizational changes, which are very important that the Secretary is announcing. I'll first talk about those in the Department of Defense and defense agencies. I will mention briefly what's going on in the Joint Chiefs of Staff and in the Chairman's controlled activities, and then just very briefly reference what's happening in the other areas. First, let me say that there are some major changes that are occurring. It's not simply downsizing. There are some very important management changes that are being incorporated here, and I'm going to talk about each of these separately. First, let me talk about the Defense Management Council. We are creating a new organization. It's the Defense Management Council. I will be the chair of the council, and it will be comprised of the undersecretaries from the military departments and from DoD, and the vice chiefs from the military departments, as well as the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs. We are going to become the board of directors for the department from a management standpoint. And one of the first things we're going to do is negotiate performance contracts with all of the heads of the defense agencies. This is a standard technique that's been used in business for years, but we have not done it here in the Department of Defense. Many of the defense agency heads know they report through somebody, but they really don't report to anybody. And this is now going to be the new organization to whom they report, and they'll be accountable to this organization. This organization will also be responsible for monitoring the rest of the reform efforts that you're going to see. Second, Probably the most important thing that's happened in the last 8 years after the end of the Cold War is the emergence of a very new, complicated international environment. On the one hand, you'll be working with a country like Russia, in some ways in a collaborative fashion. In other ways, they're still an adversary in other areas. For example, when we're working to try to stop the proliferation of ballistic missile technology to places like Iran. Managing this right now is difficult because we're split in a number of different locations, and so we're bringing it all together into a single organization. We're creating a new defense agency called the Threat Reduction and Treaty Compliance Agency. We will be consolidating 3 existing defense agencies that are doing work that's related in different ways: the Defense Special Weapons Agency, the On-Site Inspection Agency, and the Defense Technical Security Agency. These 3 have had different pieces of this overall problem. Nobody has had the complete problem to manage. We've also had offices here inside the Office of the Secretary of Defense that have been working on parts of this. For example, cooperative threat reduction. We've actually been running that out of the Office of the Secretary of Defense. We're now going to be putting that into a single agency. We will also at the same time be streamlining the policy secretariat so that we will have an assistant secretary for strategy and threat reduction who will be taking care of oversight in this area as well from a policy standpoint. Education, and here I'm talking about education for civilians, not military. We consider ourselves a world-class organization, but we do not have a world-class system of education for civilians. We have lots of schools and lots of programs, but we do not have a consistent policy as it relates, for example, to accreditation. Only 10% of our courses are certified or accredited by an acknowledged accreditation agency. There are no systematic continuing education requirements for faculty. There are no research requirements for faculty so that they stay current in their field. We need to change all of that. To do that, the Secretary is going to appoint a new chancellor for education and professional development. And this individual will be the quality assurance person for the department for education and professional development. He or she will also be the one that says these are dollars well spent as opposed to this area or another area, and will help us make overall resource allocation. We will not let anybody teach a course after the year 2000 that has not accredited or been certified by a world-class accreditation organization. Where we can, frankly, we're going to put as much of this in the private sector. They, after all, are in that business, but we are going to be insisting on a systematic way to measure performance in education. This is frankly something that the profit-seeking side of the education industry has done very well at, as opposed to the traditional universities. When a large corporation wants to send technicians to learn how to, for example, tear apart a photocopy machine and rebuild it or repair it, when they send them to a school to learn how to do that, they want to know that they get an educated technician out of the process. And so they've developed good tools for performance measurement. Frankly, we've not done that in either the Department of Defense, and frankly, a lot of universities haven't done that. This is going to be a major part of the Chancellor's responsibilities as well. Finally, let me talk about the role of the Guard, especially the Guard and the Reserve Forces, in a very new mission that's emerging here in the Department. DOMS stands for the Director of Military Support. It is a command center inside the Army, and it is the command center that takes care of peacetime emergencies. When there's flooding in North Dakota, as there was this spring, when Hurricane Hugo comes crashing across the South Carolina coast, when there's rioting in Los Angeles, we manage those domestic assistance activities out of the DOMS command center. We believe that we need a stronger role for the National Guard in this DOMS Center for one major reason. As you know from the Quadrennial Defense Review, the Secretary asked that we develop a much stronger program with the Guard taking the lead in it as a 911 reaction force for potential terrorist activity using chemical and biological weapons. The incident in the Tokyo subway was a wake-up call to everybody, and the Secretary directed that we develop a program to deal with that, and that this be largely a Guard mission. To do that and to have the planning capabilities for it, we're strengthening the DOMS command center and putting a general officer down there from the National Guard. Okay, let me now show you kind of the large scale changes and what that means in terms of percents. The Office of the Secretary of Defense, the first, we will be cutting it by about a third. There are 3,000 people who work in OSD. I should also say we had some hidden employees in other places who are really doing OSD work, and so we've brought them all together now. There are 3,000, and we'll be reducing that by 33%. Roughly half of that is going to be from transfers to, for example, we've been running the Chem D-Mill program, you know, for demilitarization of old chemical munitions. We've been running that program here in OSD. We'll be transitioning that to the Army. So about half of them are from transfers, and the other half are from reductions. In the joint staff and in the chairman's controlled activities, there'll be about a 30%, as you see, a 29% reduction over the next several years. I should also say most of these reductions, we will try to accomplish them in the next 18 months. The military department headquarters are going to be reduced by 10%, and that's going to be incorporated into the budget that we submit in January. And defense agencies will be down by 21%. The field activities that are associated with DoD directly, there will be about a third reduction in those. A lot of that involves transfers to the defense agencies. Let's see, I already talked about, I guess there's a duplication here. Let me go back. Okay, now I'm going to talk about the streamlining actions that we're going to undertake. Let me first explain what A76 is. A76 is the process that we use in the government to compare government employees and private sector employees to decide where is it more cost effective. Should we do the work by government workers, or should it be done by private sector employees? There's a very specific and detailed process for evaluating and comparing what's more cost effective. On the average, over the last 20 years, when we do an A76 evaluation, the government wins half of the time, government employees win roughly half of the time, and private sector companies win the other half of the time. On the average, when the government wins, we save 20% compared to the old way of doing business. So what we are doing and what we're forecasting for savings is we're assuming the government wins 100% of the time. And we think we're going to be able to save $6 billion over the next 5 years from this. Now this is a dramatic increase. As you can see from this chart, we are going to be competing 120,000 positions over the next 4 years. That is more than has been done in the entire history of the A76 program over the last 25 years. Matter of fact, this year we will compete 34,000 jobs. That is a tenfold increase in the A76 competitions that were conducted last year. So this is a major emphasis that the department will make. This is what's contributing overall to our goal of saving $6 billion a year by the time we get done with this program. In addition to those, we will continue the competitions that we've launched at the Air Force depots at Kelly Air Force Base and McClellan Air Force Base. The first competition there for C5 work saved $300 million off of that competition. $200 million directly off of the contract, was almost 25%, and $100 million of cost avoidance from infrastructure savings. We intend to do A76 studies in these other areas. Payroll, retiree pay, etc. Let me say something about leased property. We spend about $900 million a year on property leases, but we don't have a single person that's managing it. We've got about 80 people that are managing this. And we need to bring this under some scrutiny. We need to both get a better arrangement here inside the government and frankly expose ourselves to competitive pressure to get a better management system for leased property. Finally, let me talk about infrastructure. We will be asking Congress to give us permission to do 2 more rounds of base closures. One in 2001 and the other one in 2005. We expect from these, and we need, frankly, from these 2 rounds to save on an annual basis $2.8 billion. And so by the time that those rounds are concluded, we anticipate having annual savings of $2.8 billion. In addition to those base closure BRAC rounds, we are also going to be directing DISA, the Defense Information Systems Agency, to downsize its mega centers. There are, about 5 years ago, there were 250 or so data processing centers, big computer centers. They shrunk the number down to 16, and we're now telling them to shrink it further to 6. The Defense Finance and Accounting Service 5 years ago had 330 locations where they were doing finance and accounting. We have consolidated them. They're now down to 5 centers, which largely do the dispersing function, and 20 operating locations that largely do the accounting. We know we have twice as much capacity as we need, and so we will be directing them to roughly cut their operating locations in half. As I said, I'm going to be heading up this Defense Management Council. We will start next week. Our first meeting is next week. And as I said, this is going to be the nerve center for managing this entire reform process. We will oversee these A-76 competitions, and we will be laying out, you will see the Secretary's directive in the white paper that will be distributed on Monday. That white paper is going to have specific milestones of what's going to be done and when is it's going to be done, and we will be keeping track of that through this Management Council. Okay, let me wrap up, and you've been very patient. Our goal here is to, ultimately the bottom line is to save the muscle. And to save the muscle, we have got to bring in modern business practices into the Department of Defense. This organization is truly a world-class organization when it comes to military capabilities, but it is not a world-class organization when it comes to business activities, and we've got to start bringing that energy into the business side of the house. Fortunately, today there are actually technologies that can help. This kind of technology, internet-based technology, imaging technologies that are available to start bringing in these modern business practices, things that frankly weren't available only 5 and 7 years ago. We will take what we find best in industry, and we will use it. But we honestly believe that government employees have got lots of good ideas, which is why we're not going to simply privatize at all costs. That's not our goal. Our goal here is competition, and competition is going to bring out the best value when it's all done. That's it. Let me thank you for taking the time to listen to me, and why don't I see if there are any questions that you have.
Going back to the organizational reform at your percentages, can you translate that into a total number of people?
Yes. Let me give specific. In the Office of the Secretary of Defense, today there are 3,000 roughly, and it'll go down to 2,000. And we intend to do that over the next 18 months. For the field operating activities associated with Oasd, currently there are about 8,000, and they will go down to about 5,000. And that will also be over the next 18 months. For the defense agencies, currently there are about 120,000 in the defense agencies, and they will go down by about 25,000. That's going to be over a 5-year period. Down by 25,000. So they'll be around 95,000 when it's all done. But that will be over a 5-year period because the numbers are so much larger.
Military Department headquarters?
That's a 10% reduction. It's relatively small percentage because, frankly, the number of people who are directly in military headquarters is small. I think it's about 1,600 is the reduction. Sure.
Can we direct back over to when you were talking about PCS traveling and household goods and so on? I know that's a subject that you know much about. It sounds from what you were saying that a lot more responsibility is going to land on the individual service member and encouraging the teams and so forth.
I'm glad you asked it. That I want to make sure that I'm very clear. I'm not lots more responsibility, but lots more flexibility. If a soldier, sailor, airman, marine still wants us to arrange that move for them, we'll do that. But if they want to have the freedom to say, I'd rather move myself and not be bound by a lot of regulations and rules about how to do that, we're going to let them. If they want to arrange their own move, if they say, I don't want just to be stuck with whoever you give me as a moving company, I want to pick my own moving company, we're going to let them do that. So the goal here isn't to give them lots more responsibility and frankly work, it's to give them more opportunity, more flexibility. I'm glad you asked that. That's a very important thing, and I failed in my explanation.
Many of these things have been ongoing for a number of years. We can remember back, 10, 15 years, we're talking about the paperless office. So I guess you're kind of jumping on a moving horse, aren't you, here? Or?
In part. I mean, I think it's important to say, I heard the president say this last week. It was a different context, but he said, there isn't a problem that we have any place where somebody doesn't have a solution for it. But we don't have system-wide commitment to fixing it. That's the difference here. So there are pockets all over the place of good ideas, but a systematic government, department-wide commitment to fixing it is, I think, the difference here. And so there have been lots of people experimenting with paper-free offices, and there are very few places, frankly, where it's really been accomplished. But to make a commitment to get paper out of the contracting system, nobody's ever laid a systematic requirement down. And I think that's what distinguishes this reform effort.
Talk about doing business by credit card, doing business over the internet. What about security for all this?
Yeah, that's a very, very, very good question. And we're all hearing this, about how secure is it to do business over the internet. This is a much bigger issue, and let me just take a second to talk about that. When you sit down at that computer terminal and you undertake your business, it may be to send a message to somebody, and it may be to receive a message from somebody, it may be to order something, it may be to move dollars around if you're a finance officer, whatever it is you're doing. You are operating with the full confidence that that data is honest, that whatever that message is you've just gotten, that's an honest message. It's coming over a public network. How do we know that that data hasn't been manipulated? How do we know somebody it doesn't just sit in there monitoring, snooping, listening to what it is that you're saying? These are very important issues because we're increasingly using this private sector network to do business. There are two things we have to do when we go to in this world. The first thing we have to do is we have to have encryption so that we can put government transactions over a public network, but we know that it's secure. We have to be confident that we are not looking at data that's been manipulated. And the way to do that, or that other people have seen, that we don't want them to see it. So we have to encrypt that information. But if you're going to encrypt the information, you have to have absolute confidence that you are looking at data and who it is that's on that network. And the only way to get that is through what's called a public key recovery system. Mathematicians have found a way to create a digital dog tag, basically, for you to operate on the computer network. And so when you're operating on that network, that digital dog tag is going with your activity. We need a way to know that who you say you are, that you really are that person. So we need to have a data bank that we can compare that against and say, yes, that individual really is Sergeant Jones. Okay, and what he is sending us, he really does work for, the 1st Division. To do that, we need a system of key recovery. It's called key recovery because it becomes that data bank. It also is the way, frankly, that if we have somebody who is a finance officer and they are sending dollars across a public network, and if they're not an honest individual, we want to make sure that they're leaving fingerprints with their transaction. And that also is having this digital dog tag. Okay. So you need to do those two things together. You need to have an encryption system, and you need a way to verify the validity of the data and who it is that's behind the data. You got to do those two things together. And this plan, partly we talk about it in this, but we will be committing to having those digital dog tags in place starting the 1st of January of 1999. The technology is evolving, and frankly, it's there in a rudimentary form right now. I should also say, that doesn't mean everybody has to have in their business application the strongest form of encryption. If you're involved in processing travel vouchers, and the average travel voucher is only $250, you don't have to have, bulletproof encryption capabilities. You can use a commercial grade encryption scheme. If, however, you are responsible for sending messages to the highest level command centers, we want to make sure you've got the strongest encryption available. And of course, for that, we will use the very strong tools that have been developed inside the government, and it's called the Forteza system. So that's is a very, very important question.
In talking about the outsourcing or contracting out payroll services, personnel services, all of that, did you look at contracting out health and dental care?
We looked a lot at the healthcare system, and I know that there are it's a lot of discussion about it and some controversy associated with healthcare. I think first thing we have to say is I think peacetime healthcare, I think they're doing very well. I think that where 15 years ago there was a great sentiment that frankly our military treatment facilities were substandard. I don't hear that anymore. I don't think we're hearing that anymore. I think we feel that you get quality health care in our military treatment facilities. I know that we had some rough bumps along the road in TRICARE, and we had some initial problems, especially with some of the early contractors. I think a lot of that's being worked out, and people are understanding the system, and you can get quality care through TRICARE. So I think that side is working fairly well. What we feel is probably not working as well is what we're calling medical force protection. When you're going overseas and you're going to a place like Saudi Arabia, are you getting proper vaccinations and inoculations? Is everybody who shows up in theater, have they gone through the medical preparation for it? Have they received their shots, for example, vaccinations, what have you? If we're entering into a world where potential opponents in the future may use biological weapons or chemical weapons against us, we have to have a much stronger program of force protection, medical force protection. We feel that's really where we have to put a priority right now. It's not in here because it's not an organizational change per se, but you will see this fall a major effort coming out for medical force protection. We also frankly think if there's one thing we need to do for peacetime health care, we need a stronger program on health promotion. Being healthy. Frankly, that involves alcohol use. We have still far, far too many people who are in hospital beds for alcohol-related illnesses or accidents. We still have too high a usage of tobacco and the health consequences associated with tobacco. So that's also something we feel we need to do in the healthcare area.
Also, sticking with the basics, commissary. I understand
Commissary.
the DoD may be getting out of the commissary business.
No.
and
Oh, I'm so glad you
giving it
asked
to the
that.
services.
That's exactly. I'm so glad you asked that. We feel that it is much better for the military services to be managing the commissaries than it is for the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Right now, the commissary agency reports in through the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. We believe the services can do a better job of day-to-day management, and they will be reporting instead now as an agency to the services directly. Okay. So, yes, ma'am.
What's to prevent the Air Force from offering really, really good commissaries, and the Marine Corps, who tend to focus much more on expeditionary type things?
The commissary agency will still be operating as an agency. Okay, so it is. We're not breaking up the DECA. We're not breaking up the commissary agency. It's still going to be operating as an entity, but it now has a new board of directors. The board of directors are the senior personnel general officers for each and flag officers for the military departments.
Question on the role of Guard and Reserves in DOMS. Just wondering what implications might flow from this. There's going to focus towards operations other than war, peacetime operations. What implications does it have this for training, for manning, and size and whatnot?
You're asking very good questions, and frankly, I don't have answers for that because we still need to go through the kind of a detailed process of figuring out what does it mean to get ready for this new mission, frankly, that we're giving to the National Guard. The immediate implication is that we're going to have a stronger Guard presence in long-term planning for this mission. And over the next several months, we're going to be laying in exactly what it is we're going to be asking as we're developing our budget request for next year. This is a complicated issue. If we're now trying to get ready for future potential terrorist activity in our cities that involve these weapons, this is a real challenge. And are we properly organized? to handle that? Do we have the right kind of equipment? Do we have the right kind of command and control arrangements for it? How do we interact with local emergency authorities, with police departments? Lots of work that has to be done over the next, frankly, the next several years. We started this at congressional direction a year ago, and we have a survey team that's out now working with various cities. We've identified 108 municipalities where we are working with their emergency response forces. So far we've met with about 27 or 28 of these cities. Some of them are very well prepared. Some of them have been thinking about this for a while. Most of them have not. Most of them are not ready for this. Frankly, we're not ready for it either, but we're going to get ready for it because it is going to happen at some point in our future, I fear. And we're not going to be able to handle it unless we start laying the foundation right now for it. That's what we want, this stronger presence in DOMS, especially with a National Guard general officer, to be working on this kind of a problem. In addition to the normal, emergency response.
Would it be a similar capability in the active duty force built up?
No, well, we honestly think this is a mission. This specific mission is one that could be overwhelmingly undertaken by the reserve components, especially the National Guard. We don't envision any change in the command and control arrangements between DOMS and the National Military Command Center. So those command and control arrangements will remain the same. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs on behalf of the Secretary still has to be in charge of the execute orders that are going out to active duty forces. But for those response activities here in the United States and coordinating with the Federal Emergency Management Administration, coordinating with the local emergency response teams at every state, the local civil defense directors, as it were, with the governors, that command center is just right down the hall. And we need to have that stronger, frankly. And that's what we're trying to do with this.
At the beginning, you talked about bringing modern business practices to DoD. How is this going to benefit all the service members, whether they be in Korea, Germany, Italy, Panama?
Yeah. As I said, I don't think I've been to a base where I haven't had a military personnel, an individual in the services, tell me about how bad they think the travel system is. Frankly, I'm hoping that they all see it directly, with not having long lines, getting their check reimbursed quickly, not waiting forever to get reimbursed, not having to collect all kinds of little sheets of paper, treat them as an honest individual, not second-guessing everything. So that's one of the first things I hope to see. I hope that we have 800,000 moves a year, and I hope that we start seeing better service. And so that people don't have to worry about their furniture getting cut up and putting in a shipping container by a poor mover. 75% of our movers are good, but they're being pulled down by the poor movers that we have working for us right now. I hope we see a dramatic improvement, frankly, not having 25% of all of our moves end up in damage claims. I hope soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines see that directly and soon. I can't tell you the times that I've been out and I've talked to individuals, talked to a pilot and say, "How do you like your job?" And he says, "I love the flying. I love it." I said, "But I just can't stand all the paperwork." Or you talk to a first sergeant and say, "What's it like?" He says, I don't mind working 8 hours a day, but it's working the extra 4 hours a day filling out all the paperwork that's driving me crazy. I mean, it's a great frustration. So on the job, I hope they're going to see it by frankly having much more user-friendly tools to get their job done. Not having to rifle through and find forms. Have that form embedded on their computer so they can just bring it up and fill it out and then send it off electronically. Not having to go through 4 or 5 places to try to get basic office supplies. Not having to go traipsing down to a ServMart to get office supplies. You're able simply to order it right at your desk, and it shows up. They deliver it to your office. I mean, just basics. I mean, this is now the norm in the private sector. Why in the world can't that be the norm for the Department of Defense? It ought to be, and I think that's where I hope it shows up directly for individuals.
You talked about contracting a lot of things out to the private sector. What about, and one of the ideas that's been floating around for a long period of time now is contracting the housing out on the installations. Where are we with this?
First, let me say, we're talking about competing for it, not necessarily just automatically contracting it out. History has shown that half of the time the government wins on those things. So it doesn't necessarily mean people's jobs go away. It means we're going to compete, and I think everybody's going to get better. Now let me just talk about housing. We have substandard housing in the department. I think 75 to 80% of government housing right now is substandard. We desperately need to get a stronger housing program in the department. We started this, and Dr. Perry started this before when he was the secretary, and we honestly believe we're going to do a better job if we can harness, frankly, the private sector building industry to help us get more purchasing power out of our dollars. We're convinced from our studies that we either pay 30% too much, or we could get 30% more housing for our dollars if we were to use commercial standards, for example. So over the last 2 years, using the temporary authorities that Congress gave us, we have launched a series of public-private partnership for building new family housing. I think altogether there's something like, don't hold me to the number, something like 10,000 housing units right now that are going to be built under those terms. We're going to ask Congress for that to be a permanent authority. We know it works, and we just want to be able to expand on that authority so that hopefully we can start getting better housing out there in the field.
One of the ideas they were talking about when they were looking at this housing deal was having a service member pay rent, having his BAQ and BHA go to there. We're still looking at that.
No, that was in one of the, there was a task force that looked at it and said, should that be a technique and would that work? There are just too many problems associated with that, so that's not on the table.
We've been trying to get rid of the 25% of the bad apples in moving for years, but if there's more contracting out, isn't there a danger that your 25% of the contractors will also be bad apples, and will be problems that will have to be dealt with?
I think the best way to get better service, for example, in moving is frankly to utilize the 800,000 auditors that are on the scene every year for our moves. That is the people that have to live through it. I mean, right now, somebody else is responsible for quality control rather than the people who are being moved. The best way, frankly, to put auditors on the spot is to let service members decide what they want to do. You know, let them say, I want to arrange my own move. They'll figure out who's the good company and who's not the good company. Right now, under our current procedures, the only thing we can do is disbar a company if they really screwed up. And then that company, frankly, can change its name and come in surreptitiously and start all over again. You know, well, I'll tell you, it's a lot better to have those 800,000 auditors on the scene. Just like I always used to say, the one bad part about being the comptroller was I had 1.5 million auditors every pay period, and that's the people who got paid. Every one of them looked to see did they get it right. You know, and frankly, that's the kind of thing I think we want to do in the moving business here. If you count on remote clerks, other than moving, I mean, I think by and large, well, let's use it in the area of for vendors supplying goods and services. I think we'll be a lot stronger if we focus the time and the professional talent we have, for example, in the acquisition business. If we have them focus on quality controls, for example, rather than spend all their time simply trying to process contracts. Right now, most of our acquisition offices, they're spending all their time just trying to chunk out these little contracts, get them out the door. What's the value added of producing a contract for $2,200 for office supplies? I mean, but we're spending all our time and energy, frankly, clunking out contracts. I'd rather have them spend their time designing omnibus contract instruments and then letting individuals buy it, and then we'll monitor performance and monitor quality. Right now, we don't have enough time to monitor quality. We're so busy simply processing the transaction. I really honestly think instead of managing the contracting process. We ought to be managing contract quality. I think that really has to be our goal in the future. And we can do that if we start developing some of these new approaches. By the way, I think that the contracting community sees it that way as well.
I think some people feel, this is a different subject, that they've sort of been nibbled to death with consolidations and whatnot. The mega centers, now we're talking about reducing from 16. We've had so many base closures and realignment. We're talking about 2 more. Why not do it all at once? I think might be the attitude. What's the answer to that?
Well, we are, what, in our 10th or 11th year where our budget's been cut every year? I mean, we've been drawn down. I don't know of another organization in the world that could have lived through this systematic a downsizing and still undertake its mission the way it did. You know, in any one year, we will take in about 250 or 260,000 new recruits. Or, excuse me, about 210,000 new recruits, and we will separate most of them because they've come to the expiration of their period. About 280,000. I mean, we're going to have 400 to 500,000 people a year coming or going, you know, in the military services. What organization in the world could do that and yet at a moment's notice be able to get over, not moment's notice, but in days, be able to send a battalion over to the Persian Gulf to demonstrate we're prepared to stop an invasion from Iraq? There's not another organization in the world that can do that. In 5 days, the Department of Defense was able to transport food and water purification equipment 8,000 miles away and frankly save 1 million people in Rwanda. There's not another organization in the world that can do that. And we've been doing that after 6 and 7 and 8 years of being cut. Unfortunately, it's just not behind us because we still have very tight budgets. And so we're going to have to ask the support side of the house. It's going to have to start going through these kinds of things so that we can continue to do that job. It's still a remarkable organization. You know? We got to keep it that way.
A lot of commercial, larger companies are finding now that they've drawn down too far and can't deliver the services that they need to, and they're starting to build up again. And you were talking about Oasd, you mentioned it's not just downsizing, but in fact we are losing a bunch of people. Is there any fear or concern that we might be going too far in the loss of manpower, and that could cost our service members important services that they need?
I think it's on everybody's mind, and of course that's something that we can't have happen. We've got to monitor it very closely. We've taken a long time studying this, and I don't personally believe that what we're talking about here is going to result in a direct loss of services to military personnel, in terms of quality of life, for example. But that's going to have to be something we monitor very much. Just as we monitor, for example, readiness on a monthly basis, we're going to need to monitor that as well. We can't, you know, people have got to feel that things are getting better from these changes, not that things are going to get worse.
We've got time for one more if there is one.
Sir.
December 15th, I think, is the date that the National Defense Panel
Yes.
submits its recommendation.
They submit it to the Secretary on the 1st of December, and the Secretary is required to submit it along with his comments on the 15th.
Do you expect that to impact on what you're doing here?
No, I have talked with Phil Odeen, Mr. Phil Odeen, who is the head of the National Defense Panel. He knows of what he hasn't seen this presentation yet. He knows generally the things that we're looking at. He's very supportive of what we're looking at. I don't expect to see any rejection or disagreement with what we're proposing coming out in that area. Of course, his presentation is much wider than just these management issues. His presentation is going to deal with issues of strategy and force structure and long-term research and development. And in that area, there may be some differences, but I don't think in this area. You've all been very kind. Thank you.